This is a reading of An Island of Trees, written by Ruskin Bond, read by Prerna. Koki and her grandmother were sitting on a string cot in the shade of an old jackfruit tree, and grandmother was talking about her father and his great love for trees and flowers. Grandmother said, I was never able to get over the feeling that plants and trees loved my father with as much tenderness as he loved them. I was sitting beside him on the veranda steps one morning when I noticed the tendril of a creeping vine that was trailing near my feet. As we sat there in the soft winter sunshine, I saw the tendril moving very slowly away from me and towards my father. 20 minutes later, it had crossed the veranda steps and was touching my father's feet. There is probably a scientific explanation for the plant's behavior, something to do with light and warmth, but I like to think that it moved simply because it was fond of my father. One felt like drawing close to him. Sometimes when I sat alone beneath a tree, I would feel a little lonely or lost. But as soon as my father joined me, the garden would become a happy place, the tree itself more friendly. Your great grandfather had served many years in the Indian Forest Services, and so it was natural that he should know, understand, and like trees. On his retirement, he built this bungalow on the outskirts of the town, planting the trees that you see around it now. Limes, mangoes, oranges, and guava, also jacaranda and laburnum and the Persian lilac in our valley. Given the chance, plants and trees grow tall and strong. Of course, there were other trees here before the house was built, including an old peepal tree which had forced its way through the walls of an old abandoned temple, knocking the bricks down with its vigorous growth. Peepal trees are great show-offs. Even when there is no breeze, their broad-chested, slim-waisted leaves will spin like tops, determined to attract your attention and invite you into the shade. What happened to the temple? Asked Koki. Well, my mother wanted the peepal tree cut down, but my father said he would save both the tree and the temple. So he rebuilt the temple around the tree, and there it is, on the other side of the wall. The tree protects the temple, and the temple protects the tree. People from these parts feel there's a friendly tree spirit dwelling there, and they bring offerings of flowers and leave them at the base of the tree. Did you know that I used to climb trees when I was a girl? This jackfruit was my favorite tree. It's easy to climb. You climb it too, don't you? Another good tree was the banyan behind the house. Its spreading branches, which hung to the ground and took root again, formed a number of twisting passageways. The tree was older than the house, older than my grandparents. I could hide in its branches behind a screen of thick green leaves and spy on the world below. Yes, the banyan tree was a world in itself, populated with small animals and large insects. While the leaves were still pink and tender, they would be visited by a delicate map butterfly who left their eggs to their care. The honey on the leaves' sweet, sticky smell also attracted little striped squirrels who soon grew used to having me in the tree. They became quite bold, accepting food from my hand. At night, the tree was visited by a hawk cuckoo. Its shrill, nagging cry kept us awake on hot summer nights. We called the bird papiha, which means rain is coming. But father said that according to Englishmen living in India, it seemed to be shouting up and up the scale, oh dear, how very hot it's getting. We feel it, we feel it, we feel it. Well, the banyan has long since gone. It came down in a storm, aerial roots and all. Father planted another, but as you can see, it's still quite a young tree. The banyan takes a long time to grow. Your great grandfather wasn't content with planting trees in the garden or near the house. During the monsoon, he would walk into the scrubland and beyond the river bed, armed with cuttings and saplings, and he would paint them out there, hoping to create a forest. But grazing cattle always finished them off. No one ever goes there, I said. Who will see your forest? We are not planting it for people to see, said my father. We are planting it for the earth and for the birds and animals who live on it and need more food and shelter. Father told me why mankind and not only wild creatures need trees for keeping the desert away, for attracting rain, for preventing the banks of river from being washed away. But everywhere people are cutting trees down without planting new ones. If this continues, then one day there will be no forest at all and the world will become one great desert. The thought of a world without trees became a sort of nightmare for me. It's one reason why I shall never want to live on a treeless moon. I helped my father in his tree planting with ever greater enthusiasm. One day the trees will move again, he said. They have been standing still for thousands of years, but one day they will move again. There was a time when trees could walk about like people. Then along came a terrible demon and cast a spell over them, rooting them to one place. But they are always trying to move. See how they reach out with their arms. On one of our walks along the river bank about a mile upstream from here, we found an island, a small rocky island in the middle of the riverbed. You know what this riverbed is like? Dry during the summers but flooded during the monsoon. A young tamarind tree was growing in the middle of the island, and my father said, if a tamarind can grow here, so can others. As soon as the monsoon arrived, and while the river could still be crossed, we set out with a number of mangoes, laburnum, hibiscus, and coral tree saplings and cuttings, and spent the better part of a day planting them on the little island. We made one or more visits to the island before the monsoon finally set in. Most of the plants looked quite healthy. The monsoon season is the best time for rambling about. At every turn there is something new to see. One of earth and rock and leafless bough, the magic touch of the summer rain brings forth new life and verdure. We can almost see the broad-leaved vines growing. Plants spring up in the most unlikely places. A peepal took root on the roof. A mango sprouted on the window sill. My father and I did not want to remove them, but they had to go if the house was to be prevented from falling down. If you two want to live in a tree, that's all right by me, said my mother. But I like having a roof over my head, and I'm not going to have it brought down by a hanging forest. Already I can see roots breaking in through the ceiling. The visiting trees were carefully removed and transplanted in the garden. Whenever we came indoors from our gardening and sat down to a meal, a ladybird or a caterpillar would invariably walk off our sleeves and wander about the kitchen, much to my mother's annoyance. There were flowers in the garden, too. My mother loved fragrant flowers like roses and sweet peas and jasmine and queen of the night. But my father and I found trees more exciting. They kept growing and changing and attracting birds and other visitors. Banyan tree really came into life during the monsoon. The branches were thick with scarlet figs. We couldn't eat the berries, but the many birds that gathered in the tree, gossipy rosy pastors, quarrelsome miners, cheerful bulbuls, and coppersmiths, and sometimes a noisy bullying crow would feast on them. And when night fell and the birds were resting, the dark flying foxes flapped heavily about the tree, chewing and munching loudly as they clambered over the branches. The tree crickets were a band of willing artists who would start singing at almost any time of the day. At the height of the monsoon, the banyan tree was like an orchestra with the musicians constantly tuning up. A small flute in my hand, I would add my shrill piping to that of the crickets and cicadas. But they must have thought poorly of my piping because whenever I played, the insects fell silent. When I grew up, I was married and went to live with your grandfather in Bombay. We were there for many years, and I could only visit my parents once or twice in all that time. I had no brothers, so when my parents died, they left the house to me. It will be yours one day. Would you rather live here or in that poky little house in the town? Here, said Koki, but only if you're here too, Granny. The trees will be here, said Granny. And what about the island? Asked Koki. The trees you planted, you and your father, are they still there? You can see them for yourself if you feel like a walk. But I'll tell you what I found when I came to live here again after 20 years or more. I walked out of the old house and took the same path that my father and I used to take during our walks. It was February, I remember. My eye was immediately caught by a spectacular red plume of the coral blossom. In contrast with the dry riverbed, the island was a small green paradise. When I walked over to the trees, I noticed that a number of parrots had come to live in them. A small spotted deer scampered away to hide in a thicket, and a wild pheasant challenged me with a mellow, "Who are you? Who are you?" But the trees seemed to know me. I'm sure they whispered among themselves and beckoned me nearer. I ran my hands over their bark, and it was like touching the hands of my old friend. And looking around, I noticed that other small trees and wild plants and grasses had sprung up under the protection of those whom we had planted there. The trees had multiplied. The forest was on the move. In one small corner of the world, my father's dream was coming true, and trees were walking again. Thank you for listening.